Welcome to the Friendly Circle Berlin Recovery Workshop Series. I'm Julie, and today we're joined by Dr. Gail Brenner. Gail has become a good friend in our group, and this is the second workshop she has kindly and generously put on for us. So we appreciate that, Gail. Thank you. By training, Gail is a licensed PhD psychologist and trauma specialist with almost 30 years of experience, offering individual sessions and group workshops. Her work as a therapist and teacher invites people to shed attachment to false identities, return into their essential wholeness, and realize the truth of who they are. Today's workshop title is Deep Trauma Healing and Conscious Relationships, meeting ourselves and others with kindness, care, and compassion. So once again, thank you, and over to you, Gail, and thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a longing that we all have as humans to feel connected in our relationships. And as many of you know, sometimes it's not easy. Things get in the way. What we really want in our hearts is not what's actually happening in the relationship. So we want to disentangle that. We want to get into, like, what is it that's happening in a relationship, and specifically in an interaction, because we want to get very focused with it. Like, what is happening that makes that interaction not be fulfilling in the way that you want it to be? And in an ongoing relationship, and maybe even just an isolated interaction, what I find is that it's essential to look at and know about our early trauma patterns and how they show up in our relationships in order to have close relationships. I don't speak about anything that's not my own experience. So that's definitely been my experience when I was caught in my trauma patterns before I even realized it or knew anything about that. My relationships were not very satisfying. And I think I was difficult to connect with because all of that conditioning was where I was living from. But this process of really understanding what our patterns are that come from our early experiences in life, it lets us learn how to take care of ourselves so that we can be more present in relationships and be able to be more compassionate with other people as well. So we really connect. So I'm going to read a quote. I think the chat is, I'll try to, I don't know if it's coming through, but generally between two people, there is very little real meeting. There is only the coming together of two patterns. This causes conflict and boredom. And this is by a non-dual teacher, Jean Klein. So there is only the coming together of two patterns, not real meeting. And I think what we all thirst for and long for is that sense of real meeting, that we really feel heard and met and we're present and we can hear and meet the other that we're interacting with. And then we feel close, it starts to feel safe. We're able to go more vulnerable with what we share. And so we really want to look at, like, how can we know what our patterns are, even in the middle of an interaction, and take care of ourselves? Because when we're stuck in early trauma, and let me just stop there and say what I mean by an early trauma pattern. I use the word trauma pretty generally. It means anything that happened to us when we were young, in the environment that we were growing up in, that caused us somehow to leave ourselves. So we weren't met, we weren't seen, we were rejected, and that can have all versions of that. So, abuse of any kind causes us to leave ourselves so that we can figure out how to cope with a difficult situation. So any relationship that you had when you were young on an ongoing basis, like with a parent, for example, where you didn't feel seen and met, you didn't learn how to deal with emotions. Maybe your emotions weren't, there wasn't space for them in the relationship that you were in. And when we aren't met just as we are, we all crave unconditional acceptance. And when we aren't met just as we are, we have to do something inside to cope with that. Because we're little, we're young, we are in a family or in some situation where someone takes care of us. As humans, as a species, we need care for many, many years until we're able to live out in the world on our own. So we have to figure out a way to stay safe and be connected in our relationships as best as we can. And to do that, sometimes we end up pleasing others and being perfectionistic. And we develop our own inner critic so that we can get it right. We withdraw, we hide. Some of us cause conflicts in order to get some attention. So there's lots of strategies that we develop from our early trauma patterns that if we don't know what they are and we don't work on them and try to figure out how to move past them and how to grow into ourselves in a more full way, we're going to be stuck and our relationships are not going to be very satisfying. So that's the invitation, to know what our early trauma patterns are, and then to learn. And this is not like, we have a 90-minute workshop here. It's not a very quick one-time thing. It's an ongoing process and a living, what I find eventually is a living just way of being in life, where we know ourselves, we take care of ourselves, and that enables us to have more space to be there for other people and really find that heart-to-heart intimacy that we're all looking for. So trauma happens in the context of relationship. If you end up with, an environment where you have your emotional needs met, you're loved and cared for, and, maybe not perfectly, but pretty well, then you're not going to need to develop some kind of strategy in order to keep yourself safe. But when we have these kinds of challenging relationships when we're young, we grow up, holding on to those patterns. So I always say, and other people say as well, that trauma develops in the context of relationship. So it needs to heal in the context of relationship. And we need healing communities like, what Patrick and, the rest of the people who sponsor these global meetings do. It's so essential that you guys get a safe space where you can come and learn and share, which we'll do later on, and really let yourself be heard. The more we have those kinds of relationships where we feel safe, the more we're going to be able to come out of our shell and heal our shame and be more comfortable being ourselves, so that we can be vulnerable in our relationships. Because one of the things that creates a deeper relationship is more and more vulnerability on both sides. So really, learning how to have how to discern, because, if we grow up with an early trauma pattern, we're not very good at discerning when it's safe in relationship. So for some of us, we have lots of needs and people pleasing and seeking approval. So we're out there trying to get that attention any way we can. And we're not very discerning about who we choose to be in relationship with. Does that ring a bell for anyone? Yeah. And so that's one strategy. So, we're not really being measured and grounded in how we choose the relationships that we're in. And so that's a need-based strategy. And another strategy is fear-based, where we've just learned not to feel safe, not to trust anything. And we make a generalization: I'm not going to trust anybody. And that comes from early childhood. And then we come into adult situations like this and other situations in your life that might be perfectly safe, but the inner child in you is still saying, this isn't safe, so I need to withdraw. So that's a fear-based reaction. I withdraw, I hide, I isolate, I don't tell anybody what's going on. And that's a fear-based, mistrusting way of being. in relationships. So there's need-based, where you're out there trying to get what you need, and fear-based, where you pull back and go into yourself out of fear and mistrust. So the fear strategy, does that resonate with anybody? Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So if we don't explore these strategies, we play them out in our lives as adults. That's just how it works. They don't go away on their own. There has to be a process of recognition and bringing consciousness to these patterns, bringing tools to the ways that these patterns show up. And I'll get to that in a second. And this is an ongoing lifestyle that, in the end, what I find is it's just incredibly fulfilling to know myself and really know others. Because if I don't know myself, I don't have space for anybody else. And I don't know if that's true for you. If you're caught in needs and you're like out there in Buddhism, it's sometimes called the hungry ghost. I need, I want, I need to get. You're focused kind of on the other person, but what you're mostly focused on is your own need and getting what you think you need so that you can get that well of emptiness filled up. And if you're afraid, you're pulling back. Patterns are all about me, me, me. And when we're stuck in what we think, what we need, what we think we need, keeping ourselves safe, there isn't space to actually be present with the other person that we're with. To be curious, to be quiet, to not be playing out our strategies, but just to really connect with the person in front of us. So that's what this quote means. Generally, between two people, there's very little real meeting. You're in your pattern, somebody else is in their pattern, and there's that dance, locked into that dance that you're both doing. And there's only the coming together of two patterns. So the medicine for that is to really begin to bring attention to your pattern, to know what it is. And there may be more than one, but there's usually one primary way that you are in life, that you learned from when you were young, that you continue to bring into your relationships. And so what we want to do today is begin to shed light on those patterns and bring some tools to them so that we can walk with them in an intelligent way and bringing wisdom to our in the moment experience of our lives. So the idea, not to get rid of patterns, that doesn't happen. These are very conditioned ways of being, and they're rigid. It's like you're in one lane going back and forth without a lot of space and options for how you're going to react or show up in a relationship. So these patterns are very rigid. So patterns usually have, let's say, three components to them. One is a story. There's something mental in the realm of thoughts that you're telling yourself. I need to feel safe. I can't feel safe. I can't trust this person. I'm inadequate. I'm needy. I need to have whatever I think I need to have to feel safe. I need to withdraw to feel safe. And it could be much more elaborate than that. It's some story that we tell ourselves based on not having gotten what we need when we're young, that we keep bringing into our relationship. So there's a mental component to that, a story, a thought-based reality that we create for ourselves that is actually a veil. So if the beginning of your story is I'm inadequate, that's the lens through which you're looking at the world and at all the people in the world. So if you're inadequate, you might withdraw. Oh, I'm going to fail. I'm useless. No one's going to like me. Or I need to keep striving and striving to get connection in life. So that's a story that's part of the trauma pattern. So it's good to recognize what our stories are. Another part of our trauma patterns is emotions. Fear, I would call need, shame, grieving, sadness, rage, terror. These are emotions. And sometimes when we're just starting this work, we don't even know what an emotion is. We don't even know what a story is. So just getting used to emotion language to be able to identify, like, how do I feel right now? What feeling is present in me right now? And then the other part, the third part of a trauma pattern is, and we'll do a guided meditation in a minute to explore all of this. The third part is how we feel in our bodies, the physical sensations. So if your trauma happened very early on in life, and that happens to many of us, mine's actually pre-birth, it starts there, we only begin to feel the trauma in our bodies. We don't have language for emotions. We don't actually feel emotions. We certainly don't have thoughts and stories if we're very early on in life, before the brain is developed to have the capacity for language. So the emotion shows up in a reaction in the body. So an example is if you are, say, 2 or 3 months old and you're very hungry and you're in your crib and you're hungry and you're getting hungrier and you start crying and then you start screaming and then you start wailing, that's the only strategy you have available to you at that age. And that's very physical, very physically stressful for the infant in the body. So if that kind of experience happens over time, for some of us, unfortunately, for years, we develop certain patterns in the body that stay stuck. So when we bring attention to get curious about our patterns, we want to look at what's happening in the body, at the emotions that are showing up, and at the story, the thought that's been developed as a result of the pattern. So we want to have a tremendous amount of compassion for ourselves for having these patterns. They're very functional at a certain time in life. Like if you learn to withdraw and hide, someone I spoke to recently used to hide in the closet in her home to find some sense of safety. So if your pattern is to hide, that was very functional at a certain time in life. And whatever it is, whatever your strategy was, we give like honor to it and we say thank you for developing that strategy because it was needed back then. But the healing comes when we realize we don't need that strategy now in our current lives, in our adult lives. It's not getting us the kind of relationships that we really want in our lives. So that's when we start doing the work around these trauma patterns so that we can have more freedom from them. If we don't do the work, we're bringing the past into the present. If we don't do the work, we're bringing the past into the present. That's the veil. That's what's in front of our eyes. So we can't actually meet someone else as they are. So we take a look, like, what is that veil? And then what goes along with that is seeing others. If you're in a like a friction kind of relationship or interaction with someone, not only are you in your pattern, so is the other person. And when we have more space in our relationships and our interactions, first of all with ourselves, we have the capacity also to have more compassion for the other person and know that they're coming from a pattern too. And there's a lot of compassion that can come from that. Like, I'm in this stuck place in my pattern. So is that other person. Like, let's just acknowledge that, be together in our stuckness and do a reset, bring some tools to ourselves. So that's a lot of words. So let's do some of this in practice, in guided meditation. And what I always think is super important is we have to do these inner explorations. It's absolutely essential. You can come to the next million meetings or read books or watch YouTube videos or whatever you do. But until you take what you hear and make it alive in your own experience, It's only going to be conceptual. It's not going to be a lived reality for you. So this is an invitation to really bring your attention inward to your own experience so that you can begin to get very familiar with your own patterns so that you can begin to shift them. And we'll talk about that also. So I want to invite everybody just to, before we close our eyes, and we'll do that in a second, just to take a look at some of the people on the screen, because we are in a relational space here right now. We are relating to one another. Maybe we haven't spoken, or that's fine. But even if your camera's not on, but I know most people's cameras are on, just take a look at the page you're on, or maybe another page, and let yourself be in relationship with a couple of people who you see. Maybe it's someone new or someone familiar. And just see how you feel inside as you connect with one or two other people. Everybody has a different energy to them, so everybody feels a little different. So just let yourself be aware inside of whatever you feel as you connect, as you recognize that just because you are here, you are part of our relational space. You belong here. So that's objectively, you're here, so you belong here. You may not feel like you belong here, and that may be the beginning of some kind of pattern showing up in you. But let yourself feel a sense of belonging here and how that feels in your system, in your emotions. So I'm going to invite you now to close your eyes. And even though your eyes are closed and we don't have the visual of seeing other people on the screen, we still can feel that we are all a part of this relational field. And if closing your eyes doesn't feel right for you, you can just look away and soften your gaze. So you're not looking at anything. It's an opportunity for your attention to turn inward toward yourself and your own experience. So come into this process with a sense of curiosity as much as you can. So you don't know what I'm going to say or what we're going to do here. So there's this unknown and having a sense of curiosity. That's a good quality to bring to our life, really, anytime. Curious about our inner experience, curious about what's going on with someone else. But for now, let's be curious, and just for right now, about the sensations of the breath. So putting your attention on the breath, just to notice what sensations are appearing. What's appearing right now? So no judgment, no need for it to be any different than it is. We create this field for ourselves that is unconditionally accepting of whatever arises. So if the breath feels shallow or choppy or smooth or deep or whatever it is, however that the sensations of the breath are showing up, that doesn't matter at all. Just be with it with your own loving presence. This is actually self-compassion, bringing unconditional, welcoming to whatever shows up in you. And now I want to invite you to get curious about what's happening in your whole body. So that's a lot. There might be a lot of sensation or energy, or maybe a sense of being shut down or no energy. Whatever it is fine. So again, centering yourself in open space that's curious, accepting, non-judging, and just notice maybe one or a few sensations in your body. And it's very simple, like, there's some tension behind my eyes. There's a sense of contraction in my right hip. I can feel my feet on the floor and there's a sense of pressure there. So very simple. What sensations are appearing in your body? And by noticing what's happening and accepting it as it is, welcoming it, just saying, yes, yes, this is what's here right now, we begin to get a sense of groundedness inside. And more coming back to this sense of groundedness is a huge, super helpful tool when we're aware of our early trauma patterns. So we can go, there's that pattern happening, and we'll go into that more in a second. And I can just take a breath. I can feel my feet on the floor. I can feel some sensations in my body. It gives you a sense of feeling more grounded in the here and now. And now take a look to see what emotions might be present for you right now. Could be anything. Maybe you feel raw, shut down, happy, content, furious, grieving, sad. It's such a gift to give yourself unconditional acceptance for whatever is arising in you. So the mind might come in like, I shouldn't feel that way, or, that feeling again, or I don't want to feel the way I feel. That's mind, that's mental. But the invitation right now is just to go to the emotion, whatever it is, and say, yes, here's this emotion. It can just be here. And for some of us, that might be radical because we're so used to avoiding our emotions or pushing them away or distracting from them or doing everything known to mankind except to turn and feel. And as you probably know, those strategies don't work to bring us the peace and contentment that we're looking for. Maybe short term, but the long-term sustainable solution is to learn how to recognize and bring unconditional acceptance to whatever we're feeling. And to do that, the first step is important. We have to recognize, what am I feeling right now? And as you pay attention to the feeling, it might change or be more intense, less intense, go away, whatever, it doesn't matter. You're just giving it that unconditional welcoming, which really is unconditional love for whatever is appearing right now. And really, what's happening as we are with ourselves in this way over and over is that we're giving ourselves what we always wanted when we were little, which is unconditional acceptance. And it's a process, of course, but over time, little by little, we learn just a little bit more to be accepting of ourselves. And when we are, we're healing the pattern little by little. We're healing those tender and painful places in ourselves that didn't get the love and care that they needed. And we can give them that love and care right now. And then also recognizing thoughts. Just to notice, like right now in your thoughts, not to get stuck in them, but is there maybe a recurring story going around in your mind? Maybe just a lot of thoughts just flooding. Maybe your mind's foggy and confused, quiet, shut down. Maybe kind of pressured, angry. Just get a sense of the quality of your thinking mind right now. Maybe there's a sense of I'm right. Now I want to invite you to bring to mind some trauma pattern, some place that you get stuck that probably comes from your early childhood. And maybe you get stuck in a certain emotion or a certain impulse or tendency to want to do something. Maybe the way that you get stuck is in your mind, repeating some kind of story like, oh, that person, what they're doing, I don't like it, and they should treat me better. And we want to hold whatever you're noticing right now. Maybe it's physical sensations or emotions or thoughts. Just hold that with a great amount of love and care and compassion. Like, yes, this pattern is here. And you might even say, thank you. This emotion, this pattern, however it's showing up, served at a certain time in your life and it helped you. And maybe you're realizing that it's outlived its usefulness. You've grown. You're in a different place in your life right now where you need something different than this old pattern from the past. So a gentle bowing, thank you. I needed you back then. You protected me. And now contemplate for a moment when this pattern gets going and it takes over and it's in the driver's seat of your life, your everyday life. Just contemplate for a moment What do you really want in those moments? So if your pattern shows up in a relationship with someone, what do you really want? If the pattern weren't in charge, so the pattern's in the back seat and you're driving the car, how do you really want that moment to be? How do you want this interaction to be? And I want you to focus on your experience, not someone else. Like, I want someone else to stop talking, or I want them to give me an apology, or that's about external to you. So the invitation is, how do you, in your loving capacity, your desire for freedom and connection, how do you want to show up? And even if you don't know how or whatever, that doesn't matter. But what is the possibility for you? Now I want you to bring to mind someone who you feel close to in your life. And maybe there's friction in the relationship, that's fine. And how do you want to show up when you're with this person? So the invitation here is not to get rid of the early pattern, but to acknowledge that it's here, to surround it with love and care and holding, and to then also be in charge as you are right now and as you want to be. So the pattern doesn't have to go away. It's just not the guiding force for how you are in the moments of your life. And when the pattern isn't in charge, you get to be free. You get to come up with new options. You get to see yourself and the world and other people in a fresh way. Very good. So just see what's coming up for you around this process. I love the idea of doing a reset when we're stuck in our patterns. Even if you're in the middle of an argument, it could be any time. Just go, I need a reset. Come back. Feel your feet on the floor. Ground yourself in the moment. I'm here. Come back to yourself and out of your pattern. And then begin again. How do I want this moment now to be? And it doesn't matter if you do that a million billion times. That's what it takes. Just notice, I'm in a pattern, in a place I don't want to be again. So a moment of compassion, and then for that pattern, and then coming back to yourself, to spaciousness, to more freedom. So just take a minute to feel your feet on the floor, to ground yourself, feel yourself here, belonging here, being here. And then when you feel ready, you can begin to open your eyes. And from this grounded place within and having a sense of the pattern that you were just reflecting on and being with. So really grounded inside. Take a look at the screen again. In our relational field, we are in relation here. And as best as you can, feel a sense of care and compassion for everyone that you're looking at. Everybody here, I'm assuming, has a pattern running in them. So who you're looking at, they've had their troubles. They've developed their ways of being based on their early childhood. And as best as you can, feel a sense of care and compassion and understanding. Then we're not looking through the veils of our patterns and projecting out on the world that people are going to reject us or be mad at us or not be safe in some way. If we're in our patterns, we're making huge assumptions about other people that may or may not be true. So just as we looked at our own experience with curiosity, we can do the same. Like, oh, I don't know what your patterns are. I don't know what your life experience has been. I don't know what you're going to say in the next second. So coming to it with an air of openness, curiosity. That's part of the medicine for our patterns. Being open to something new and fresh. Great. So I want to say a couple words about safety, because you might be saying like, oh, what I'm presenting here, it's all well and good as long as I feel safe out there with people, and people don't always feel safe. And safety means that you're not going to get rejected or hurt or taken advantage of. Well, it's true that the world isn't safe out there and people isn't always safe. We can't rely on it to always be safe. We can't rely on people to always treat us with love and care and tenderness because they're dealing with their own things. So we find the sense of safety inside by knowing what comes up in us, knowing what our patterns are, and taking care, bringing compassion and kindness to ourselves. What I find is that that's been transformational as I'm more and more able to care for my own patterns. I'm less influenced by what's happening out there. So say somebody rejects me and I feel rejected. I go inside and I know that that's a young part of myself that felt rejected years ago. And I can go, there you are. I understand you're activated right now, that part of me that takes it personally or feels rejected. And so that inner work around that is so important so that you can begin to recognize that the world may not always be safe out there, but there are people and interactions where you can trust. And you can trust when you can take care of that place inside you. You have infinite possibilities available to you when you know that you can take care of those tender places inside. So safety starts from within, from the inside out. Intimate interactions start from within, from knowing ourselves and finding that spaciousness to actually connect heart to heart.